Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the coldest, darkest corners of history where curiosity wasn't a lantern, but a blade. You're probably imagining experiments like in modern labs clipboards, goggles, people in white coats with very polite consent forms. Maybe you're picturing ethical reviews, double-blind trials, and scientists whispering in clean rooms like they're auditioning for a TED Talk. But nope, that's not what we're doing tonight. We're going back further, much further. What if I told you that in the medieval world, curing disease and torture chamber were often the same room? That sometimes, what passed for scientific progress was just someone in a robe stabbing someone else with a glowing iron rod and shouting, "Aha! The evil humours are escaping, and you, poor time traveller, are standing at the edge of it all." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little rabbit hole reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The torchlight flickers like it's too afraid to stay still. You step into a room so quiet it hums, like your eardrums are waiting for something to break. The air tastes metallic, cold, like biting down on a spoon. In front of you, a large chair sits at the centre of the stone floor. Not a comfy chair, not a throne. Something crueler, built not for sitting, but for keeping someone still. The iron chair. Every part of it is a lie. It looks like a chair, but it's really a confession booth for agony. Spikes line the seat, the back, the armrests, even the footrest. Some of them are long enough to pierce muscle. Others, just barely enough to break skin, but still sharp enough to threaten infection and fever. The metal is rusted, and the rust is laced with old blood that was never fully scrubbed away. It crunches under your boots like old leaves. This chair wasn't invented for punishment alone. No, that would be too obvious. It was used to study pain response. The idea, if you can even call it that, was simple. What happens when you bleed someone from 50 tiny wounds at once? How much pressure can a body take before it breaks? Can we learn something from that? You want to say this is torture, but some people, mostly monks in dark robes or secular surgeons with too much time and too few ethics, called it research, Inquisition doctors. Yes, that's a phrase that existed, kept notes. They timed how long it took a man to scream, or faint, or die. Sometimes they brought in scribes to record how a person screamed, whether they wept first, whether they tried to pray. You hear a noise, a soft rattle, a chain. No, it's your own heartbeat trying to echo off damp stone. Historians still debate whether the iron chair was more symbolic than functional. Some claim it was rarely used, more of a threat than a tool. But others point to detailed accounts in manuscripts buried in Vatican archives and strange drawings found in 13th century physician manuals. And let's be honest, if it wasn't used, someone went to a lot of effort building a chair that no one was supposed to sit in. And here's where it gets worse. The iron chair was sometimes preheated. Yes, fire underneath it. Because apparently being stabbed in 300 places wasn't informative enough, it had to burn too. Medical records from Bavaria in the 1400s describe heat trials to stimulate the body's rejection of disease, which, translated from medieval Latin, basically means they lit a fire under someone and watched what happened. The smell, you already know it. That thick scent of burning hair, skin sizzling like bacon, only horrifying. It sticks to your nostrils, like regret. In fact, many reported seeing physicians cover their faces not out of modesty or plague precautions, but because they couldn't stomach their own experiments. You move closer and notice carvings on the armrest. They look like letters, maybe initials, or maybe scratch marks. Maybe someone was counting the seconds. Maybe someone was trying to leave a message, "I was here. I felt this." And here's the absurd part: some believed the iron chair could actually help someone. The theory was that intense trauma could expel demons, realign blood humours, or shock the spirit back into balance, like trying to fix a watch by throwing it against a wall, or paying your taxes in the middle of a sword fight. One 14th century document refers to it as the Throne of Revelation, which sounds dramatic until you realise the only revelation was how fragile the human body is when faced with sharp objects and cold doctrine. But we shouldn't linger too long. That torchlight is dimming, and the chair, The chair isn't empty anymore. You blink and there's someone in it. Not dead, not alive. Somewhere in between. Their eyes are wide open, but unblinking. Like the pain is still happening somewhere inside them. Their fingers are curled around the armrest, skin fused to the spikes. A whisper curls around the chamber, too faint to catch. Like a chant you've heard before but can't quite name. That smell again, damp stone, mould, and something older. A sourness, like vinegar and dried blood. Zoom out. Imagine a medical student lighting a candle to study by, flipping open a page that lists this chair as Instrumentum Investigatio. He reads it like it's Latin poetry. He doesn't know that somewhere, buried in the fabric of that page, are echoes of screaming. Want to hear something completely off-topic? In 1297, a French monk tried to study human tears by standing outside an onion market and watching who cried more, the buyers or the sellers. He concluded that grief increased near garlic. Totally irrelevant. Completely delightful. Now back to the iron chair. By the time the Enlightenment rolled around, the iron chair faded from use, not because people suddenly got kinder, but because we found new ways to hurt each other in the name of science. Cleaner ways, with ink and microscopes. But here's what lingers. Some say the chair still exists, hidden in a museum's vault in southern Spain. No label, no context, just waiting. Others say it was melted down into nails for a cathedral iron repurposed to hold up faith. And still, the question floats, can knowledge ever be worth that much suffering? The torch flickers one last time before dying out. You hear it before you see it, a thud that doesn't echo like wood or iron or stone, but something softer, something living. The kind of sound that only comes from a body meeting a surface that never planned to catch it. You follow the noise, drawn down a narrow corridor lit with wall torches barely strong enough to fight back the dark. Their flames jitter like nervous whispers. The scent of damp stone thickens. It clings to your tongue like cold soot. And then you see him. At the bottom of the winding staircase, tangled in the folds of his imperial robes, lies Tsar Peter III of Russia, sprawled like a discarded puppet, limbs twisted, one shoe missing. A faint trail of blood snakes along a stone step, glinting in the firelight like melted rubies. His powdered wig has slid half off his scalp. He doesn't look like a man who slipped. He looks like a man who was erased. Peter III, if you didn't already guess, was not exactly built for the crown. Ruling Russia for just over 6 months in 1762, his reign was a chaotic cocktail of bad ideas, misplaced loyalties, and spectacular political clumsiness. Imagine trying to host a royal banquet while juggling flaming cats. That's the kind of energy he brought to leadership. Historians still debate whether Peter was murdered by his wife Catherine the Great's loyalists, or whether he died in a wrestling match gone fatally wrong with his jailer. What's less debated is how poorly he fit into the machinery of power, like trying to plug a violin into a cannon. But what few talk about is the experiment, not the kind with test tubes and bubbling green liquid. No, Peter was part of a political experiment, an involuntary one. The goal, to see whether an outsider could be reshaped into a Russian ruler using nothing but pressure, paranoia, and psychological stress. Think of it like medieval brain-hacking isolate. Confuse, overstimulate, and then see what breaks. In his final months, Peter was subjected to a regimen designed by court physicians and royal advisors. His diet was strictly controlled not for health, but to study his reactions. One document unearthed from the Russian state archives details an incident where Peter was fed exclusively salted herring and red wine for 5 days straight, followed by sudden fasting. The goal, to observe the effects of electrolyte imbalance and mental instability in high-pressure decision-making environments. You think that sounds ridiculous, but modern militaries still do stress tests. It's just that most of them don't involve locking someone in a palace, while pretending everyone still respects them. He wasn't the only one. Across Europe, political figures and minor royals were sometimes subjected to behavioural studies, masquerading as noble responsibilities. France had a duke who was forbidden to speak for 3 months to study whether silence sharpened political instincts. Spoiler, it didn't. He just started throwing forks at dinner. But back to Peter. Toward the end, he reportedly began talking to paintings. Not in a whimsical, artsy way, more like pleading with them. One servant wrote in a secret letter that the Tsar whispered apologies to a portrait of Empress Elizabeth for letting the blood curdle. Whether that's metaphorical or he was just really bad at storing meat is unclear. Zoom out. Imagine being born into a world where your purpose is shaped before you even speak, where every glance is judged, every bite of food recorded, where people surround you not out of love, but calculation, where you can't sleep without someone analysing your dreams for treason. It's not just a prison, it's a living vivisection. And then you fall, not just from power, but down the stairs, in a bathrobe, with your wig sliding off. The torchlight flickers again, and the corridor grows colder. Want something weird to lighten the mood? In the 17th century, a German pharmacist tried to cure headaches with powdered mummies, as in real Egyptian corpses. He believed the ancient flesh still held healing energy. Customers reportedly described the taste as burnt almonds and deep regret. Now, back to our poor Tsar. Peter's treatment wasn't medical, but it ticked many of the same boxes. Controlled environment check, manipulation of diet, sleep, and social contact double check. Observation without consent, absolutely. It's the kind of experiment you'd expect to find in a dystopian novel, not tucked between fur cloaks and golden sabres. The whispers from behind the stone wall return, faint, repeating, almost like chanting. You can't make out the words, but they feel familiar, like something whispered in the back of your skull when you were trying to sleep last Tuesday. Maybe it's your mind filling in the blanks, or maybe it's a memory not yours. Peter's body was quietly removed, his death blamed on hemorrhoidal colic, which sounds more like a cursed Victorian euphemism than an actual cause of death. Later, some scholars suggested he may have been poisoned with a blend of belladonna and foxglove substances that were ironically used both in murder and medicine. One letter from a Polish ambassador described Peter's condition in the final days as unsettled by visions, convinced he was being dissolved from the inside. Whether this was due to the wine, the pressure, or the creeping weight of betrayal, we'll never know. But here's the real kicker. You don't need scalpels and wires to dismantle a person. Sometimes, all it takes is confinement, silence, and the subtle removal of hope. Peter III wasn't dissected in a lab. He was unwritten in a palace. The torchlight flares unexpectedly, revealing more stairs descending downward. Because of course this isn't over. Of course the story keeps going. Evil doesn't knock, it seeps, it drips, like the red stain on the step just beneath your boot. And just like that, the silence returns. The stairs grow narrower. The stone under your feet slickens with something that isn't quite water, and the air sharpens around the edges like it's been filtered through centuries of sighs. You grip the wall, steadying yourself against the tremble in your legs. But even the stone feels wrong here. Warmer than it should be. Almost breathing. You duck under a low archway and enter a chamber that smells like rosemary crushed underfoot. Sweat left too long in linen, and something unmistakably organic like a garden that's been buried alive. And then you see it. A man sits in the center of the room, his tonsure like a ring of shadow around a pale dome of scalp. He's still, but not in peace. There's a hole bored into his skull, not fresh long healed, rimmed in pink scar tissue and layers of waxy ointment. A metal spike juts from it like a chimney on a toy house. This is Brother Theobald. And yes, that's trepanation. The sophisticated art of drilling a hole in your head to let out evil spirits, excess humours, or occasionally intrusive thoughts. Trepanation wasn't invented in the Middle Ages. Oh no, the practice is older than farming, dating back to Neolithic skulls with neatly carved circles and, somehow, surviving patients. But in the medieval monastery system, it took on a weird blend of science, theology, and curiosity. You shuffle a little closer. Theobald doesn't move. His eyes are open, but they don't blink. He looks like he's dreaming with his face. Around him are scattered tools, a small hand drill made of bone and iron, damp cloth streaked with dried ochre, and a table littered with herbs no one alive can pronounce correctly. According to monastery logs from southern Italy, Brother Theobald had been invaded by melancholia, and after prayers failed, the abbot approved cranial perforation to release the black bile. This wasn't just faith, it was proto-science. They meant well. That's the creepiest part. Historians still debate whether these monk doctors knew what they were doing, or were just really determined to help even if it meant cracking open someone's skull like a boiled egg. Some argue they were guided by Galenic theory, which divided the human body into 4 humours. Others say it was just improvisation, and in fairness, sometimes it worked. If the patient didn't die of infection, blood loss, or spiritual embarrassment, the whole might reduce pressure from head trauma or migraines. There are records shaky, ink-stained records of monks hearing the demon flee as the final layer of bone gave way. One patient claimed he could hear angels louder after the hole was made. More likely he just had less skull to muffle the tinnitus. But you don't need to imagine the pain. Just stand in this room. Feel the chill run down your spine when you realise these procedures were done without anesthetic. Not even alcohol in some cases, because clarity of pain was thought to be part of the cure. The suffering was proof of healing, like fixing a broken leg by re-breaking it louder. Here's your off-topic tidbit of the night. In 1421, a Venetian physician tried to extract wisdom from a patient by cutting off one ear and burying it in holy soil. He swore the man became more obedient. The man, tragically, disagreed. Back to Theobald. He's not the only one. A small mural near the altar, its paint faded by centuries of smoke, depicts a line of patients waiting for their turn, each marked with inked circles on their foreheads. Some look calm, some look terrified. One is holding a dove, for comfort, for sacrifice. No one wrote that part down. As you study the artwork, you realise the same 3 herbs appear again and again in every trepanation scene: rue, yarrow and belladonna. Rue for warding off evil, yarrow to stop bleeding, belladonna to blur the memory of what's coming. You step toward a small wooden table at the far end of the room. Its surface is gouged with scratches, but not from tools, from fingernails, deep, desperate, like someone tried to claw their way backward through time, and atop it, a small bound book. You open it. Journal of the Head Winds, 1347. Page after page of notes, ink blots and diagrams detailing which part of the skull to open, depending on the patient's sin. Lust, lower left. Pride, the crown. Blasphemy, back of the head. This wasn't anatomy. It was theology with sharp objects. Zoom out. Picture a world where your illness isn't your fault, but your soul's. Where a seizure isn't electrical misfiring, but a demon doing cartwheels in your brain. And the solution is not comfort or care, but steel, smoke, and the gentle hum of chanting monks. That smell of damp stone. That's the monastery breathing you in, preparing to rewrite you. And here's the kicker. This wasn't some fringe cult. These were respected men, literate, spiritual, gentle, even. They prayed for their patients. They believed they were healing. They just did it with drills. Theobald finally blinks, just once. A single slow movement that somehow makes everything worse. As if some tiny spark still flickers behind his eyes. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The scar tells the story. Want to laugh? Okay, sort of. In the 15th century, one English doctor recommended drilling 2 small holes and placing slices of orange between them to sweeten the thoughts. It didn't catch on, mostly because oranges were rare and skulls didn't make good fruit bowls. But here, in this cloistered world of flickering torchlight and whispered psalms, trepanation was almost sacred. You weren't just fixing a body, you were unlocking a mind. The fire gutter's low now. Brother Theobald closes his eyes again. You back away slowly, but not out of fear, out of something else. Reverence, maybe. Or the faint, terrible suspicion that some part of this worked. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a whisper. What if we've forgotten something they knew? The air shifts. A new scent rides the currents, burned rosemary and iron. The next chamber waits. You follow the scent. It pulls you like a thread through a crooked hallway that seems to bend even when you walk straight. The torchlight here doesn't flicker anymore, it pulses, faint but steady, as though it's breathing with you. Inhale. Exhale. The stones sweat with moisture. Your fingertips trail along the wall and come away tacky, like dried honey mixed with something darker. A door appears low, thick, and just barely ajar. One of those doors that's too quiet when it opens, like it's been trained not to wake the room behind it. You ease it open. Inside, the smell hits you first, a dense fog of boiled garlic, crushed mint, wool soaked in decades of sweat. and something sour clinging beneath it all like a secret. Welcome to St. Mary's Hospital, circa the late 13th century. Forget what you know about hospitals. This isn't a place of quiet beeps and sterile gowns. This is more barn than clinic, built for warehousing the sick, not curing them. Wooden rafters arch overhead like the ribs of a whale. And beds are just bundles of straw separated by the hope that diseases can't hop sideways. The moans come next. Low, involuntary sounds that seem to rise from the floorboards themselves, and under all of it chanting, distant, unbroken, monks in another chamber, praying in Latin to keep the illness from learning your name. You walk past the first bed. The woman lying there stares straight at the ceiling, her lips whispering something in rhythm with the flickering torchlight. Her breath smells of anise and ash. A tiny toad rests on her chest, tied loosely with string like a sleepy balloon. She doesn't notice you. She's too busy healing. Yes, the toad is part of the cure. According to St. Mary's internal ledger, a massive wood-bound codex whose corners are stained with herbs and tears. The cure for lung dampness or melancholy cough was to place a living toad directly over the patient's chest for 7 nights. If the toad died, that meant the disease had been absorbed. If the patient died first, well, it simply wasn't God's will. Want to hear the worst part? This wasn't even considered extreme. It was standard procedure. Patients were routinely advised to drink warm vinegar with shavings of candle wax, rub their gums with salt and owl feathers, or for chronic fever inhale the breath of a fasting child at dawn. That last one was especially hard to schedule. You move further into the ward, you notice the floor tilts slightly toward the centre where a shallow trench runs, collecting runoff sweat, blood, pus, spilled wine, and probably a few regrets. Your boots make a faint squish as you pass a row of identical beds, each with its own smell, its own muttering, its own ritual. In one corner, a man is gently licking the wall. Yes, licking the wall. You pause, watching. His eyes are closed. His tongue presses against the cool limestone like it's made of honey. You wonder if he's delirious. But no, this was recommended. The walls of St. Mary's were believed to absorb the prayers of monks. By licking the stone, patients could draw out divine healing. One friar even recorded in 1272 that the west-facing wall tasted of cinnamon when faith was strong. Scholars now believe the flavour came from candle soot and the herbs rubbed into the masonry during solstice rituals. But to those desperate for a cure, a warm tongue on a cold wall was as good as hope. Off to the side, behind a curtain made of stitched-together rags, is the leech room. The smell here is different, earthier, more alive. Clay jars line the shelves, each holding a dozen black leeches slowly squirming, hungry and patient. Patients were bled based on moon phases, zodiac signs, and sin level. That's not a joke. If a priest declared you had been prideful, they'd bleed you from the forehead. Lust, the inner thigh. Gluttony, directly over the liver. There's even a preserved logbook on the wall Wednesday. Waning moon. Farmer's wife, 3 children, 6 sins. Bled 1 ounce. Reapplied vinegar poultice. Observed to weep promising. Weep promising. You sit beside a rusted brazier near the wall and look at the shelf beside you. At first glance, it holds books, but no. These are treatment slates, carved wooden tablets used to record a patient's progress. Each one notched and stained, engraved with symbols representing both the illness and the remedy. Some look like runes, others resemble stars, animals, or hands in strange positions. A few are still sticky. This isn't medicine. It's a ritual wearing a doctor's cloak. And here's something absurd to lighten the mood in. 1323, a Welsh healer claimed you could cure headaches by whispering secrets to a mole, then burying it under a new moon. The only problem, the mole had to be alive, and very few secrets are interesting enough to keep a rodent still for that long. Back in St. Mary's, you find a tiny side room. It's lined with dozens of clay figures, small, fragile, humanoid shapes moulded from the wax of prayer candles and animal fat. These were sympathy dolls, meant to absorb illness from the patient. Each one has a small hair, fingernail, or tooth embedded in its core. Some are intact, some are half melted. All of them feel warm. You touch one, and it flinches. Or maybe that's your imagination. You're not sure anymore. Zoom out. Picture yourself lying here not in comfort, but in ritual. Your body not treated, but translated. Every symptom a moral failing. Every cure a gamble between heaven and infection. You're not a patient. You're a battlefield between prayer and plague. And yet some people got better. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was the toad. We'll never know. But here, healing wasn't about science. It was about stories. About giving suffering a shape and then slicing it away. One whispered chant at a time. Now you're back at the main corridor. But there's one more room. No door. Just a curtain held together with chicken bones. You push past it and find nothing. Just silence. This was called the Recovery Garden, a name that suggests sun and soil and green shoots of new life. But there's no garden, no flowers, just rows of stone beds, each with a single body lying motionless, arms folded, eyes open, not dead, not alive, just waiting. Some were waiting to be declared miraculously cured, others to be moved to the burial crypt, and a few... Well, some monks believed that the very sick hovered in a sacred state half here, half beyond. They left them here, in the quiet, to see if God would finish what St. Mary's had started. One of them blinks, just once, want one final absurdity. In a nearby parish, a monk was said to heal kidney stones by shouting at them through the patient's belly button. No one recorded how effective it was, but a nearby cat started meowing in Latin for 3 days afterward. Coincidence? Probably, but here there are no cats, no prayers, no sound, just the faint hum of ancient hope. You step backward, the torchlight dims, the leeches writhe in their jars, and somewhere, behind the wall, the toads begin to stir. It's time to leave St. Mary's, but don't worry, the hospital never really leaves you. The torch you carry burns low now, its flame no longer eager, but reluctant, as if trying to hide what lies ahead. The passage grows colder, not like a breeze or a draught. This is the chill of abandonment, of places left behind by time, where the air itself seems to forget how to move. The scent of damp stone is stronger here, tinged with something bitter, sharp, and familiar in a way you wish it weren't. You reach the door not with confidence, but curiosity laced with dread. It bears no symbol, no latch, just a gentle push. And the heavy oak sighs open to reveal a laboratory in plague time, not the kind you'd expect. No bubbling glassware, no careful notes in neat script. This room is part basement, part prison cell, part tomb, wooden tables stained black with use, ropes coiled neatly like vipers in corners, a shelf full of dried herbs and broken teeth. A window boarded up from the outside. Welcome to the Royal Plague Laboratory. No, not a metaphor. In the 14th century, a few kings and high-ranking nobles attempted what could only be called controlled plague exposure. The goal? Understand the disease. Maybe even find a way to weaponize it. Because when power meets fear, experiments happen. Whether anyone's taking notes is secondary. You walk further in. On one table lies a rat cage, now empty. Its metal bars bent outward. Next to it a loaf of mouldy bread, gnawed in one corner. Above it hangs a sign in Latin observation of consumption behaviour under rot. Translation. They fed plague-infected bread to prisoners and watched to see how long it took before boils bloomed like black blossoms beneath the skin. This wasn't just sadism, it was funded. In 1351, King Edward III allegedly commissioned an apothecary to collect data on how fast different types of food accelerated infection. Salted pork, onion gruel, goose fat. They even tried wine mixed with crushed emerald because someone claimed green gemstones defended the blood. It didn't. Across the room, you find something worse, a chart. Drawn in charcoal on a goatskin scroll, it maps the progress of 4 test subjects over 10 days. The final entries are just smudges. Perhaps they died. Perhaps the scribe ran out of nerve. Either way, the last recorded words, nose bled upon speaking, fingers blackening, still sings. Want a laugh that shouldn't be one a court doctor in Bohemia tried to cure plague patients by burying them up to the neck in fermented cabbage. His notes claim the odour repelled death. The real effect, the patients begged to be executed instead. Back in the lab, you move toward the far wall. A set of iron rings is bolted into the stone. Restraints for subjects who tried to escape. Some were volunteers, usually beggars promised a crust of bread. Others were condemned criminals offered a chance to serve the kingdom one final time. Either way, the lab called them specimens. There's one more book. Bound in leather so worn it feels more like skin than parchment. You open it gently. Inside, inked in cramped Latin, is a list of substances tested as plague cures duck bile for internal inflammation, goat urine to rebalance heat, crushed pearls to cool the fevered mind, human sweat harvested from the armpits of the newly recovered. The last one is underlined with a scribbled note too unpredictable, only effective when taken within 1 hour of collection. Zoom out. You're standing in a room where people were infected on purpose, for science, for fear, for control. Not to save them, but to study them. You think modern trials are harsh. Imagine being strapped down, force-fed rat-soaked barley, and told it's for the good of the realm. Historians still argue over whether these plague labs existed in more than rumour. The documents are scarce, the locations vague, but the surviving artefacts iron restraints, coded journals, bone fragments marked with chalk paint a grim picture, and the royal funding logs. They don't lie. You step around a shattered pot, its contents long turned to dust, but a faint odour lingers sweet, with a sharp aftertaste. Like spoiled honey and vinegar, your torch flickers violently. You look up. There's a mirror, not silvered, not clean, just a dull piece of polished obsidian mounted to the wall, used, according to a note beside it, to observe the changing expressions of the afflicted. So even in the throes of agony, someone was watching, not to comfort, not to heal, to measure. You lean close, and for a moment, your reflection doesn't blink with you. It lingers, curious, like it's trying to decide whether you are the experiment now. Need another odd fact: during the Black Death, some Parisian physicians wore cloaks soaked in vinegar and rose oil, not to protect themselves, but to signal that they were immune through divine favour. They walked through plague pits swinging pomanders while shouting sermons. Some were later found dead in alleyways, still clutching their perfumes. The torch sputters again. You realise the room is beginning to breathe differently, quieter, slower, almost like it's closing its eyes. There's one final table, covered by a black cloth. You lift the corner. Underneath a child's shoes and tiny, worn down, next to them, a strip of parchment labelled control group. You don't want to know, and the room doesn't tell you. Outside this lab, the world kept moving, the plague ended, the kings died, the rooms were sealed. But the question remains, can curiosity ever justify suffering? And can a test still be called scientific when no one survives to report the results? You step out, leaving the door open behind you. Let it breathe. Let it remember. Because forgetting is the final experiment, and we are all still inside it. The passage winds downward now, spiralling like a thought you can't quite shake. The torch in your hand, though guttering low, clings to life with a stubborn little hiss. The smell of damp stone has shifted, now tinged with sulphur, and something faintly sweet, no, not sweet, metallic, like burned coins or the inside of a spent match. You emerge into a cavernous chamber that crackles with heat and menace. Shelves sag beneath glass flasks and ceramic bowls. Hooks dangle from the rafters, and in the centre of it all, glowing gently from beneath a copper dome, stands the furnace of the alchemist's lab. Here, in the early 1400s, men with long beards and longer egos tried to change the nature of reality. Lead into gold, dust into immortality. And along the way, people into powder, you'd think of them as proto-scientists, early chemists, visionaries, and sure, some were, but others were just bored. Dangerous men with too much mercury and too few boundaries. You walk toward the hearth, where the heat radiates so fiercely it seems to warp time. On a nearby slab sits a collection of small bones, each tagged in faded ink, subject Thomas, age 12, dosed with quintessence of sulphur, died smiling. The smile part is a lie. These weren't noble experiments to unlock secrets of the universe. They were human trials, unregulated, unrecorded, and often uninvited. The alchemists believed in transmutation, but not just for metals. They tried to transmute illness into health, ignorance into wisdom, And yes, life into something purer. That purity came at a cost, and that cost was often measured in screams. In one corner of the lab sits a long table smeared with copper stains. Nearby, a manuscript lies open, its pages scorched at the edges. You read a passage in the second trial. The assistant expired before his teeth softened. The third trial showed promised subject wet mercury for 3 minutes before skin calcified. Calcified? Like marble? Like a statue made of regret? Want a bizarre detail. One 15th century Italian alchemist believed that the secret to immortality lay in feeding a virgin boiled silver, then distilling her breath into a tincture. He tested this theory once. Just once. He died from internal burns after drinking his own brew. In the back of the room is a pit. Not a metaphorical one. An actual stone-lined well, used to dispose of failed ingredients. You lean over the edge and catch a whiff of burnt feathers, rotted fruit, and singed hair, and something else. Something like sorrow baked in smoke. It's easy to write off these alchemists as lunatics in robes, but they were funded, protected. Some had royal patrons. Even the Vatican dabbled in alchemical purification methods, often under the name spiritual medicine. If your body was sinful, why not try to refine it? Melt away the impurity, cleanse the soul from the inside out. Historians still debate how many of these experiments were real and how many were rumour. Some manuscripts are maddeningly vague recipes for eternal youth that read more like abstract poetry than science. But then, there are drawings, detailed diagrams, accounts written in shaky Latin by people who saw things happen and couldn't forget them. You approach a small cabinet labelled volatiles. Inside are cracked vials filled with powders of every hue: crimson, violet, a disturbing shade of green that seems to glow faintly in the dark. Next to them are wax-sealed jars marked only with numbers. A chart nearby reads, Substance 3, Induced Temporary Blindness. Substance 7 caused subject to believe they were flying. Substance 9 resulted in full-body shedding of skin. You don't ask what was in Substance 9. Zoom out. This wasn't just chemistry. It was theology in disguise. Alchemists saw the body as clay to be shaped, the soul as a vapour to be extracted, bottled and improved. People weren't patients or even test subjects. They were vessels, testable, expendable vessels. And yet the alchemists left behind hope, too. Tucked between the horrors, they wrote of cures, a powder made from saffron and coral that eased seizures, a salve of vinegar and linden bark that soothed plague blisters. Not everything was monstrous, just most of it. One of the vials tips over. You catch it mid-fall barely. Your fingers brush the rim, and for a second, everything feels heavy, like the air thickens around you, like the lab is waiting for your reaction. Want a weird historical side note? In 1492, Pope Innocent VIII was dying. His physician attempted a transfusion using the blood of 3 young boys. All 4 of them died. The records don't explain why, but one theory suggests the blood had been purified with powdered emerald, because of course it had. Back in the lab, the furnace sputters. You walk closer, and the heat becomes unbearable. The air warps. Behind the flames, you see shadows moving like figures trapped in glass, a trick of the light. Maybe, or maybe some part of these victims lingered, smelted into the stones themselves. You turn to leave, but notice one more thing. A mirror again. Not like the one from the plague lab. This one is warped, misshapen, framed in bronze. When you look into it, you see your face, but not quite. Your eyes are too wide, your mouth slightly open. You're breathing faster than you thought, and behind you something watches. You spin. Nothing there, just the table, the scroll, the bones. Zoom out once more. The alchemists weren't evil in the way we think of today. They were curious, but curiosity unchained from ethics becomes a monster in a robe. A monster with a mortar and pestle. A monster who believed that fire purified all. You step back, and the torchlight flares. As you exit, the door swings shut behind you on its own, sealing the heat and the shadows inside. But not before you hear it. A faint cough from the furnace. The hallway tilts. Or maybe it's you. You steady yourself against the cold wall, fingertips brushing the familiar sweat of old stone. The torch in your hand stutters, casting jittery shadows across the floor, like it's trying to dance away from what's coming next. And then you hear it, a tap, 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 rhythmic, repetitive, somewhere ahead. At first, it sounds like water dripping, but then it speeds up, changes, footsteps, dozens of them, out of sync, in sync, then wildly, terrifyingly wrong again, like someone's rehearsing a waltz with no idea how feet work. You round a corner and the passage yawns open into a wide chamber with high ceilings and faint streaks of painted stars overhead. It looks like a ballroom, or it was, once. Now the chandeliers hang broken, the stained glass windows are boarded up, a banner of St. Vitus droops from a beam, moth-bitten and sagging under its own faded glory, and in the middle bodies, dozens, some collapsed, others curled in on themselves. One man lies with his hands clutching his knees, a grin frozen on his face like rigor mortis chose joy. Another woman sways gently, still moving, her bare feet bruised and bleeding. Her dress clings to her like wet paper. Her head lolls, but her legs keep moving. Welcome to Strasbourg, 1518, and welcome to the dancing plague. Yes, this happened. In July of that year, one woman stepped into the street and began to dance. No music, no festival, just pure, frantic, uncontrollable motion. Within a week, dozens had joined her. By the end of the month, over 400 people were said to be dancing in the streets, not in celebration, not in joy, but in exhaustion, in delirium, some even in death. They danced until their legs gave out, then they crawled, then they died. You walk slowly through the chamber, the sound of your boots echoing over what feels like a battlefield. There's a broken lute on a table, a pair of shoes so thin they might have belonged to a child. The scent here is something between old wine, spoiled bread, and sweat so stale it's fused with the walls. There's something else too, something you can't place, something sour and fungal, like wet grain left too long in the dark. One corner of the room holds a table, littered with crusts of bread and shards of broken clay mugs. Historians now suspect ergot poisoning may have been to blame a mold that grows on rye, capable of producing effects similar to LSD, hallucinations, convulsions, the sensation of burning from within. But even that doesn't explain it all. You kneel next to a woman still rocking slightly. Her eyes are wide open, pupils blown, her feet twitch against the cold floor, and her mouth. She's whispering something. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. You step back. There are records over a dozen describing this event in great detail. City leaders, priests, even physicians documented what they saw, people moving against their will. Doctors attempted cures, cold baths, bloodletting, exorcism. Nothing helped. One bishop ordered the afflicted to be marched, barefoot and bleeding, to the shrine of St. Vitus. Some died along the way, others began dancing faster. In a strange twist of logic, the city authorities eventually constructed a stage and hired musicians. Yes, really. They thought that if the dancing was unavoidable, maybe formalizing it would help purge the sickness more efficiently. Imagine turning a mass medical crisis into an open-air concert. It didn't work. If anything, the music made it worse. Zoom out. This wasn't an isolated event. There were dozens of these outbreaks across medieval Europe, from the 1300s to the 1600s. People danced themselves to death in cities from Aachen to Basel to Zurich, and every time, no one could say exactly why. Some blamed the wrath of St. Vitus. Others thought it was witchcraft, or the devil himself forcing sinners to jig their way into the grave. But for most people watching helplessly, it was just terror. And here's the part that gives you goosebumps. Many of the dancers claimed to see someone watching them. A woman in red, a figure with a veil. Some described her as beautiful, others as rotting. Some said she had no feet, and some, this was recorded in 3 separate cities, said she carried a mirror. When asked what they saw in it, they all answered the same thing: myself. Still dancing, you pass a row of masks, hanging neatly on hooks, all porcelain, all cracked, painted with different expressions: joy, rage, sorrow, ecstasy. They look theatrical, but no one's performing. A crumpled note lies on a nearby chair. You pick it up. The ink has bled, but a few words remain. We dance because we cannot stop. We stop. We vanish. She told me so. You don't know who she is, but the room does. Want something absurd to shake off the dread. Here in 1523, a Bavarian physician tried to stop a dancing plague by composing a slow dance. He gathered the afflicted and instructed them in measured steps, believing that ritualized movement would anchor the spirit. The result, most patients either ignored him or collapsed mid-minuet. And still, the theory persisted. If you can't stop dancing, maybe you just need better choreography. You approach the far end of the chamber, where a large wooden door stands ajar. Just inside, you find a small chamber, almost a confession booth. There's a single stool, on the wall, tally marks, hundreds of them, some carved with fingernails, others deeper, as if made with metal. Below it, a prayer scratched in French. Let the music stop. Let her forget my name. You don't need to know French to feel the weight of it. Zoom out again. What kind of fear turns your own body into an enemy? What kind of faith tries to dance with death and hopes it misses a step? In this world, this era, madness wasn't something inside the head. It was a visitation, a spirit, a punishment, or sometimes a plague with rhythm. You take one final look at the room, the torchlight flickers, and for a split second, it feels like every body here turns toward you, just slightly, like they're waiting, not for help, but for you to join. You step backward, and then because your legs are tired, not because of anything else, you tap your foot, just once. The sound echoes a little too loud. The whisper rides the air again, slithering across your shoulders like cold silk. Don't stop. You walk quickly now. You don't run because that would be a dance. You push through the door, back into the tunnel, and behind you, the tapping starts again. Tap, 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 and then a dozen more, and then silence. For now, the hallway narrows once more, like a throat closing around a whisper. The further you walk, the more the air seems to flatten like it's been exhaled by 1,000 lungs and never drawn back in. The smell of damp stone returns, stronger now, joined by another scent, steamed herbs and something sharp beneath it, like iron left too long in hot water. You follow the scent into a vaulted chamber. The walls drip condensation, as though the stone is sweating from what it's seen, and in the centre a wooden platform surrounded by barrels, buckets, and bundles of straw. No instruments of war, no scalpels, just water and heat. This is a healing bath, or that's what they called it. The medieval treatment of mental illness was rarely subtle and almost never kind. If a person screamed in the street, if they saw visions, heard voices, refused to eat, or simply cried too much for anyone's comfort, they were not comforted. They were boiled. The theory was straightforward in its cruelty. Heat drives out demons. Cold stirs the stagnant soul. Alternating between both, that was called tempering, and it was believed to shock the body into balance. You move closer to the wooden tub at the centre of the room. It's blackened with use, its rim cracked where iron nails bite through warped planks. The water inside is murky, still steaming faintly. A single length of rope dangles over the edge noose-like, but not tight enough to kill, just enough to keep someone still. According to 14th century asylum records, a popular treatment for madness was to heat a patient until they hallucinated, then rapidly cool them with freezing river water or snow packed into their armpits and groin. It was described as chastening the flesh to release the devil's grip. If that didn't work, they added eels. No, really. Some advanced treatments involved dropping live eels into the hot bath with the patient to stimulate the nerves. Scholars still debate whether this was meant to encourage circulation or just punish disobedience. Either way, the screaming was interpreted as a sign the treatment was working. You find a ledger resting near the tub, its pages swollen with humidity. The ink has bled in places, but you can make out fragments. Subject female, aged approx. 20 refused marriage claimed to hear voices from saints. Immersed thrice. Eels applied on second rotation. Still sings. Recommend bloodletting and more heat. Still sings. You turn a page. A drawing rough, almost childlike, of a figure curled in the tub. Hair floating like seaweed. Surrounded by wiggling lines labelled vermiscuratio. Healing worms. This wasn't an asylum. It was an experiment chamber. A place where confusion was cured with cruelty and sadness was seen as a sin to be punished. And it gets worse. In some monasteries, This method was paired with chanting groups of monks or nuns would encircle the tub and sing psalms, not as comfort, but as a sort of auditory exorcism. If the patient didn't respond to prayer, they were considered too far gone. If they responded too much, they were suspected of demonic possession. And if they smiled, well, then it was likely the devil smiling through them. You move toward the far end of the room. There, you find a shelf with small ceramic jugs. Each one is labelled not by ingredient, but by emotion: grief, lust, envy, delirium. Inside each dried herbs, roots, bits of hair. These were mixed into the baths, customised for each soul. Sage for jealousy, rosemary for wandering thoughts, crushed moths for lust. In one corner, a pile of linen wraps, some stained, some torn, all too small to offer dignity. One has a single word embroidered near the edge: Anna. She didn't leave here. Here's your off-topic oddity in a German hospital circa 1420. A physician tried to cure insomnia by making his patients sleep on a mattress stuffed with dead bees. He believed the residual energy from the stings would encourage soul rest. The patient instead developed hives. Historians disagree on whether the pun was intentional. Back in the chamber, the tub sits silent. But you hear something now. A hum. At first, it seems like your ears playing tricks. But it grows a low, vibratory note rising from the stone floor itself. It matches your pulse, just for a moment, then slips ahead, beating faster. You realise what you're hearing isn't music, it's memory. This room remembers screaming. Zoom out. Imagine being locked in a cell, told that your pain is proof of evil, that your sobbing is seduction, that your confusion is rebellion. Then imagine being tied, dunked, burned, frozen, sung at by robed strangers who believe they're helping you because the only thing scarier than cruelty is kind cruelty. And make no mistake, many believed this worked. There are records of patients emerging from weeks of hot and cold purging with clearer speech, calmer mannerisms. But those same records also note burn scars, skin loss, and permanent hearing damage from prolonged exposure to Gregorian chant. Because yes, the singing never stopped. One patient report ends simply with subject now quiet, declared cured, no further vocalizations. You're not sure if that means she was healed or if she just learned to be silent. Want to hear something absurd in a Spanish nunnery? It was believed that placing a live dove in a patient's lap would pull melancholy from the womb. The dove would be released afterward if it lived. If it died, they burned it, presumably for safety. You glance back at the tub. There's something floating in it now, a scrap of cloth, pale pink, with a single red thread stitched through the middle like a line drawn between worlds. You didn't see it before. You didn't hear anyone drop it, and yet it bobs gently, like it's waiting. You take a step back. The hum deepens. The room feels heavier, like it's soaked through with sadness that hasn't dried in centuries. You think of all the people who were told they were wrong for simply being too much, too loud, too quiet, too sad, too different, and how they were healed with pain, and how many never left. As you retreat toward the corridor, you hear it a splash. Just one. You don't look back, because that would mean acknowledging what else might still be in the water. The corridor tightens again, but not in space, just in feeling. The stone grows paler, smoother, less like it was carved by hand and more like it was grown from silence. The further you walk, the quieter it becomes. Your own footsteps feel muffled, as if the ground itself has begun to absorb sound. Even the torchlight dims, not flickering now but behaving like it's being watched, and then nothing. A doorway with no markings, no symbols, no warning, just an arch, and beyond it, a room that glows faintly with candlelight. You step inside, and the temperature shifts. It's neither warm nor cold, just controlled. The room is pristine. Polished marble floors, shelves lined with jars sealed in red wax, walls draped in heavy velvet banners, most of them embroidered with Latin prayers you can almost but not quite translate. A golden crucifix hangs over a simple bed, its sheets so white they look sharpened, and on the far side of the room a table, simple, wooden, clean, and on it relics. You're not in an asylum anymore, not in a dungeon, not even in a lab. You're in the Vatican's secret ward. and it smells of wax, smoke, and memory. This place isn't fiction. In the early 15th century, certain religious orders maintained what they called miraculum rooms, sealed chambers where divine relics were tested on the afflicted. The church called them sites of discernment. The afflicted called them something else, last chances. You move closer to the table. The relics are small, reverently placed a chipped bone in a glass case, a twisted piece of metal labelled from the arrow of St. Sebastian, a cloth ragged with age, said to have wiped the blood of a martyred nun. All of it silent, all of it waiting. Each relic has a tag, not with names or histories, with symptoms, madness with visions, tongue burning with confession, paralysis after prophecy. Child won't stop smiling. It's not the symptoms that unnerve you. It's the implication someone used these items to try and fix them. Faith-based medicine wasn't unusual in the medieval world, but here, in this ward, it was studied, monitored. The idea was that miracles could be measured. You cross to the bed. The sheets are too clean, too unwrinkled, as if no one ever moved once they lay down. A chair sits beside it, carved with angelic faces worn smooth by touch. Next to the bed, a journal. You open it carefully, and the pages are vellum, thick and yellowed, and the handwriting is jagged, like someone wrote while shaking. Entry 113, subject female. 17, eyes weeping blood. Applied thorn of St. Jerome to the forehead. Convulsions began at minute 7. By minute 12, laughter ceased, body cooled, declared sanctified. Sanctified, that word again. It sounds beautiful, holy, final. But in these pages, it's a synonym for dead. You flip further. Entry 1 to 27, male child. Claimed to see shadows praying. Placed blessed oil on tongue. Bit through tongue. Declared silent. Declared silent. They weren't healing anyone. They were testing theology on human suffering. Another page. Entry 144, woman. Age unknown. Voice echoed in multiple tones. Claimed she had been opened. Pressed bead of St. Agnes to navel. Skin turned blue. Smiled. Stopped. Smiled. Stopped. You close the book. There's a painting on the wall now. You hadn't noticed it before. It's small, dim, maybe unfinished. A woman kneeling, hands raised to the sky, her face lit not by sunlight but by some eerie glow from within. Behind her, shadows bend toward her, almost kissing her shoulders. At her feet, a small mirror. You walk closer. There's no label, but someone, years later, scratched into the frame 2 words in Latin non-redeat. She did not return. Here's the twist. Most of these experiments weren't public. They were conducted in silence, passed through whisper networks of monks and apothecaries who believed in divine pattern. If one relic cured madness, perhaps another cured grief, or cowardice, or lust. Because the church didn't just want to save souls, it wanted to know how they worked. On an absurd aside, in 1488, a French friar insisted that pilgrims who drank rainwater collected from the mouth of a saint statue would be immune to lies for 3 days. He published a sermon about it. A week later, he was caught stealing candles from the altar and insisted truthfully that he had been possessed by a hungry angel. Back in the ward, you examine a drawer near the head of the bed. Inside are letters. So many letters. Each one a request. Please, from family members, from clergy, from nobility. My son speaks backward. Please let him touch the bone of peace. My wife has forgotten our names. Give her the blood of St. Justina. I heard her humming in her sleep again. She was blind before. I think she saw something. Let her be cured or taken. You stop reading, because one letter is unopened. It has no name, just a date, written in red ink. Tomorrow's date. You put it down. The torchlight catches on something new, now a small cage in the corner, half covered by a velvet cloth. You lift it. Inside, feathers, still moving, a dove, weak, molting. A note pinned above it reads, for transferal, not yet emptied. Emptied. You remember hearing, somewhere, that doves were sometimes used in religious rituals to absorb madness. Placed on a patient's lap, left until they stopped shaking. Then the bird was either released or burned. This one still breathes, and you back away. Zoom out. Imagine being told your daughter's visions are unholy. that her words are not her own, that the cure is a bone in a box and a prayer whispered by someone who isn't sure what they're summoning. Imagine watching her scream, then go still, and then someone writing sanctified on a page, as if that made it okay. That's what happened here. Not always, not everywhere, but enough. Enough to stain these walls. Want one more detail in a monastery in Umbria? There's still a locked room said to contain the sighs of the cured, a sound recording of what healing should feel like. No one has opened it in over 200 years. Some say when they did, a monk wept so hard he went blind. Back in the Vatican ward, the silence shifts, not louder and not darker, just expectant. You leave quietly, and as you cross the threshold, your torch suddenly brightens again, because it knows. You weren't supposed to see this. The torchlight feels bolder now, as if it knows where it's going better than you do. You follow it through a stairwell that coils like a snail's shell, each step dipping lower into a dampness that no longer surprises you. The walls here are slick, and they hum faintly. Not with voices, or water, or wind, but with memory. A sound so low it becomes feeling. You step into a room that smells like copper and salt and iron and mud. A room where incense once burned and chains once clinked. You're no longer in a church or a hospital. You're in a colonial chamber of experimentation. Specifically, one designed for the dissection of knowledge and of bodies. Welcome to the era of healing the unknown. In the 16th century, as Europe expanded its colonial reach, it encountered practices and people that baffled it. Shamans, herbalists, spiritual healers, bone setters, dancers who called rain, priests who spoke in fire. The European response was predictable confusion, then fear, then study. Here, in this chamber likely beneath an early Spanish mission or Portuguese settlement, you see the results of that study. A wooden table, soaked through with time, carvings along the floor, shaped like sunbursts and birds, scored deep into the stone. Shackles hang from one wall, opposite a mural half-erased depicting a man wrapped in snakes, eyes raised to the sky. His mouth is open, singing. You walk forward and examine a set of scrolls bound in rawhide. They're labelled in both Latin and something older. You can't read the second language, but you recognise the reverence. These are transcripts of rituals recorded not to preserve them, but to understand how to break them. The missionaries didn't come alone. They brought scribes as surgeons, men of medicine who saw indigenous practices as both threat and opportunity. And when they found something they couldn't explain, they didn't ask for guidance, and they asked for a subject. On the table lies a leather-bound ledger, and you open it. Subject 18, female, 40s. Known locally as a midwife and watercaller, captured near Lake Xochimilco. Observed whispering over herbs, burned incense from cactus, claimed to know when storms were coming. Applied sensory deprivation 48 hours, no food, chance did not stop. Removed 2 molars, chance continued. Initiated bloodletting with local volunteer. Subject bit through cloth, declared spiritually unstable, prepared for extraction of heat organ. The heat organ doesn't exist. At least, not in any medical anatomy book, but for the men in this chamber, every difference was pathology, every practice a puzzle to be solved, and if that meant dissecting people who called spirits or cured coughs with tree bark, so be it. You find another entry, subject 22, male child, said to have cured fever with breath, applied mercury salve, screamed, attempted to flee, bound, screamed again, heart rate accelerated until failure, body disposed in lime pit, zoom out. This wasn't experimentation in a lab coat. This was forced ethnography with shackles and scalpels. The early colonial empires wanted to document and dominate 2 sides of the same twisted coin. The moment something couldn't be explained, it became something to unmake. They called them witch doctors. They called them charlatans. But some whispered what others believed, that these people understood things Europeans had long forgotten. And that terrified them. Want a strange but painfully real footnote. In 1599, a Jesuit priest in South America claimed that the laughter of native infants could predict rainfall. His theory was dismissed by his peers until 3 droughts ended after such laughter. He then suggested removing the babies' tongues to preserve the weather. He was mercifully reassigned. Back in the chamber, you spot a cabinet with strange objects inside. Dried roots, charred feathers, a bundle of necklaces, each bearing a small stone polished smooth by fingers long turned to dust. Next to them vials, labelled not with ingredients, but with outcomes. Sweat, post-dream, tears from vision state, last breath before silence. Each cork sealed with wax, stamped with the crest of a European order. Someone catalogued not just the death of people, but the components of belief. You move to the far corner. A small bundle rests there, wrapped in palm cloth. Inside, a crude figurine of a woman holding a child, carved from bone. She is smiling. The child is not. Underneath, a scrap of parchment in Latin was given to us willingly. Said it would keep the dreams away. No change observed. Dreams intensified. They meant nightmares. You stand up and the stone beneath your foot shifts. You kneel. Brush it away. There's a hole beneath. Small. Circular. Inside it, teeth. Human. A child's. Arranged in a ring. You don't ask why. You already know. Zoom out again. To the church. To the crown. These were acts of conversion. To the scientists. They were curatives. But to the people who lived and breathed their rituals, it was desecration disguised as salvation, and to history, a blank spot, a silence. Here's one more bizarre detail to hold on to. In some early French colonies, prisoners were forced to learn indigenous chants, then repeat them under duress to measure whether language itself could induce madness. Several were driven to self-mutilation. One reportedly carved the entire Lord's Prayer into his thigh, backward. The experiment was never repeated. Back in the chamber, the mural catches your eye again. The man with snakes. His mouth is no longer open. You're sure it was. And in the corner, the shackles sway slightly. No breeze, just memory. Want to laugh a little? In 1587, a Spanish apothecary tried to extract wisdom by boiling the skull of a tribal healer with mint and basil. He drank the broth with honey. 2 days later, he tried to baptize a dog. Then he forgot how to write. His name is still on a plaque in Madrid. No one mentions the dog. The candle nearest you extinguishes itself. Not a gust, not a breeze, just a puff like someone whispered enough. You back toward the corridor. The stone hum beneath your feet has returned. The memory doesn't want to be remembered, but now it is. You walk on, and slowly, the world begins to flatten around you, not in shape, but in sound. The torch barely crackles now. Its flame a thin blue tongue licking the dark. The air tastes colder, metallic, like you've stepped into a mouth that forgot how to breathe. The hallway opens into a wide rectangular chamber. The floor glints strangely underfoot, like glass beneath a layer of dust. The light bounces back at odd angles, and then you realize what you're looking at mirrors. Dozens, some full length, others hand-sized, many cracked or smudged, all angled toward the center of the room where a single wooden stool waits in a cone of torchlight. One mirror faces another, which reflects into a third, creating a kaleidoscope of reflections too fractured to follow. Your face appears and disappears again and again, like a question that keeps changing its answer. Welcome to the leper mirrors. In medieval Europe, leprosy was feared not just as disease but as divine punishment. It was seen as a rotting from the inside out, the physical manifestation of inner sin, a warning sign walking on 2 legs. Lepers were stripped of legal rights, declared dead to the world, forced into isolation, and sometimes forced into rooms like this. Here, mirrors weren't for vanity, they were for surveillance. The logic, if you could see your illness progressing, you might repent faster. If you could watch yourself decay, maybe you'd try harder to be holy. You approach one of the largest mirrors. A name is etched at the bottom, Brother Alaric. Beneath it, in a shakier hand, another word, sorry, that's all it says. You look closer. The glass is warped, maybe from time, maybe from design. Your reflection shifts, your cheeks hollow slightly, your eyes darken, your skin ripples. You step away. Another mirror shows a child's face permanently frozen in youth, but the glass is cracked through the mouth, as if even memory refused to let them speak. Historians debate whether these chambers were real or symbolic. Some records describe mirror confessionals as spiritual metaphors. Others include detailed architectural plans. At least 2 monasteries in France and 1 in northern Italy had such rooms. Some were used by lepers, others by clergy who feared they were losing their souls before their skin. You reach the center of the room. The stool is worn smooth by time and bone. Behind it, a small altar holds a basin of water and a sliver of silver glass too small to show a full face. Just an eye, a tooth. A moment. There's a book here too. You open it. The ink is faded. Some pages are torn. But you can make out the structure names, followed by observations. Sister Cecilia right ear eroding. Prayed. Wept. Returned voluntarily next morning. Isaac of Grey removed own fingernail. Smiled. Declared hopeful. Unnamed boy stopped breathing after fourth reflection. Washed and buried. Some notes include sketches small, hurried ink drawings of rashes, of swelling, of skin peeling from lips like bark from birch. No dates, no diagnoses, just progress reports of decay. Want an absurd aside in England? During the 1200s, a bishop claimed that if a leper recited the Book of Job while looking into a polished sword, they could reverse the rot for 7 days. He documented 3 cases. 2 ended in blindness. The third insisted his nose grew back. Modern historians believe it was just swelling. You return to the stool and sit, just for a second. Immediately, the mirrors shift. You don't see yourself anymore, not fully, just fragments an eye in one pane, a lip in another, your hand in yet another mirror, flexing without your permission. For a split second, it looks like someone else's hand. Older, bruised, twitching. This was the experiment-forced self-observation. The belief that confronting your affliction would speed spiritual purification, that by witnessing your own ruin, you might begin to heal, or beg, or go silent. But of course, there was a catch. Some didn't leave. They stayed, watching, until they no longer recognized themselves, or worse, until the mirror no longer reflected them. Want another real, horrific tidbit? In 1348, the leprosarium of San Lazzaro outside Milan documented a mirror sickness among patients. 7 individuals reported seeing strangers in their reflections, women they didn't know, whispering without sound. 1 man screamed every time he saw his own eyes. Eventually, all 7 were found dead, none with visible wounds. The mirrors were removed, the room was bricked up, and no one asked why. Back here, in the present, you feel something shift behind you. You turn. The mirrors don't move, but now every reflection is watching you, no longer echoing your movement, but holding perfectly still, like a room full of strangers who look like you almost. Zoom out. This wasn't just about disease, and it was about shame, about turning illness into sin, about believing that if you looked hard enough at your suffering, it might finally explain itself, that if you were forced to see your rot, maybe others wouldn't have to. You stand. The stool creaks as if grateful. You take a final look into the nearest mirror, and this time, you see something different. Not your face, but someone behind you. No eyes. Just a face drawn too long, wearing your mouth like a borrowed hat. It smiles, and then the mirror cracks. Just a hairline. But enough. You leave without a sound. Because the only thing worse than seeing yourself disappear is watching someone else arrive in your place. The hallway you enter next is dry. That's the first thing you notice. No dampness, no dripping, no scent of mildew clinging to your skin like memory. Just dust so dry it tastes like old paper left too close to a flame. The torchlight stretches further here, less afraid. But you should be, because this next room isn't a dungeon, it's a study. And on the centre table, laid out with surgical precision, sits a velvet cloth embroidered with lilies. A scalpel glints on top of it, flanked by a pair of shears and something that looks suspiciously like a knitting needle. You found the chamber of the king's testicles. Yes, you heard that right. You see, in the 17th century, there was a growing obsession among European royals with restoring virility, or rather, appearing to restore it. Baldness, lethargy, infertility, weakness, all were feared not just as medical concerns, but as political vulnerabilities, and that made for a very dangerous kind of motivation. King Charles II of England, for example, had over 50 court physicians. 50. One of them, Dr. Jonathan Goddard, had a theory that youth could be harvested, bottled, and returned to the body through transfusion and glandular infusion. His most infamous experiment injecting crushed dog testicles into living human subjects. Not nobles, of course. That would be obscene. No, the test subjects were prisoners, beggars, undesirables taken from the shadows and brought beneath the palace for medical advancement. You move to the bookshelf. There's a slim ledger wedged between texts on astrology and humoral theory. You pull it free. The title, written in gold leaf on the reinvigoration of the royal humour, inside lists. Subject 14 male, age 30, received injection of canine gland extract. Symptoms, fever, rash, shortness of breath. Outcome seizure at hour 5. Unresponsive by hour 9. Disposed of in lime chamber. Subject 19, female, aged 22. No known illness. Administered to test fertility transfer. Complained of boiling sensation in abdomen. Aborted trial. Hanged next morning for insolence. You feel the weight of the book, not just in your hands, in your stomach. Another page, subject 24, prisoner. Injected with essence of stallion. Recorded increased restlessness and aggression. Bitguard's hand. Died within 48 hours. Body exhibited curious stiffness in left arm. What were they trying to achieve? Immortality? Yes, but also masculinity. In the court of Louis XIV, physicians rubbed ground sheep testicles into the scalps of aging noblemen to prevent hair loss. They even had a powdered version, mixed with rose oil, for application behind the ears. Think of it as the worst cologne ever made. But the real horrors happened in private chambers where monarchs demanded vitality, and their doctors responded with vivisections of vitality itself. You approach the table. There's another tool there now, long and curved. You don't want to guess what it's for, but you remember a passage from a Spanish surgical manual. To invigorate a man's seed, the testis of a hound must be sliced, ground with sage and oak ash, and applied warm to the small of the back. Better still if the man does not know it has been done. Imagine being the patient. Or worse, imagine being the test subject for the king's vanity. Because let's be clear, these weren't cures. They were status experiments. Proof that the body of a sovereign could be tuned like an instrument, with peasants as the discarded strings. Want an off-topic absurdity? In 1684, a German scholar tried to bottle virile essence by placing a rooster and a man in a sealed room and burning mint under the floorboards. He claimed success when the rooster attacked a priest. The study was banned. The priest became a bishop. You glance back at the tools. One of them is still wet. No, not blood. Oil. Scented. Lavender and something sharper like alcohol or vinegar. It wasn't for sterilization. It was for aroma. These were procedures performed in luxury, with velvet curtains and string quartets muffling the screams. You notice now that the room has no locks, no chains, no moaning walls. But that doesn't make it any less terrifying, because this wasn't torture, it was fashionable. Zoom out. Royal men feared aging not just as a decline of health, but as a collapse of power, so they drank potions made from bone marrow, bathed in wine laced with mercury, ate cakes dusted with powdered virile stone which was, yes, ground testicle from deer and bulls. The logic: if you consume the symbol of strength, you become it. One record even claims King Charles bathed in boy's blood. Though that may be slander from enemies or just an early attempt at rejuvenation therapy. We'll never know. But we do know this: many of the test subjects didn't survive. Those who did were often disfigured, sterilized, or driven mad by repeated hormonal exposure. Some tried to escape. Others begged to be tested again, believing that strength was worth pain. Want another tidbit? In Italy, one doctor claimed to reinvigorate a dying duke by inserting powdered wolf heart directly into the man's rectum using a silver funnel. He died 2 hours later, but the doctor insisted the vigour was returning at the moment of death. This became a documented success. Back in the chamber, the torchlight flickers once more, and for a second, your own reflection in the polished scalpel handle looks younger. No, not younger. Hungrier. You step back, and you notice something etched into the table's edge. I was made better. But I was not me. That's the real horror, isn't it? Not the mutilation, but the fact that some part of it worked. That for a moment, someone really did feel stronger, smarter, harder, more royal. And then they faded. Because the king got what he wanted, and they were never meant to survive it. You expect the next chamber to be dark, but instead it's flooded with soft golden light, too warm, too gentle, almost offensive after everything you've just seen. The torch in your hand feels unnecessary here. You lower it instinctively, letting it sputter out. The air is sweet, not floral, more like milk left out too long, or honey glazed over something rotten. It's the scent of innocence, preserved, curated, displayed. You're in a nursery, or at least you were. Now, it's a testing room. Toys lie scattered across the floor, wooden horses, cloth dolls, a ball carved from ivory. The beds are too small, lined up along the walls like pews for children who never learn to pray. Each one is perfectly made, not a single wrinkle, but every pillow has a small, dark stain in the center, and suddenly your stomach tightens. Because this isn't just any place. This is where they tested blood transfusion on children, and not in the 20th century, not with anesthetic or consent, but in the 17th century, under candlelight and whispered theory, when science flirted openly with madness. You step forward. At the far end of the room sits a low table, and upon it a set of glass tubes, metal needles, and a large leather-bound book. A small flag embroidered with a French crest hangs above it, faded nearly to invisibility. You found one of the secret chambers once used by doctors like Jean-Baptiste Denis, the first man to attempt a human blood transfusion. But that's the polished version. Here's what they don't print in the textbooks. Before he tried sheep blood on a man, he tried it on children, or more accurately, on the unwanted orphaned babies, abandoned newborns, infants from poor families desperate enough to believe in miracle medicine. You open the book. It's not a journal, it's a ledger. Neatly written rows of data, birthmarks, weights, estimated ages, each name replaced with a number. Subject 003 male, estimated 6 months, received 40 ml sheep's blood, survived 6 hours, eyes bled, declared incompatible. Subject 06 female, received pig's blood, vomited continuously, expired after 14 hours. Subject 07 gift from church, notes responded calmly, blood from condemned thief, no reaction. Expired quietly. You flip the page. You wish you hadn't, because the next entry includes something new, a sketch, a baby's face, mouth open, eyes wide, and something in the mouth, a tube. Attached to it, a siphon. Handwritten beside it, no sound. This was experimentation under the guise of hope, not cruelty for its own sake, but cruelty powered by curiosity, a belief that progress was worth the price, and that the smallest, weakest humans were the most ethically available. After all, what was there to lose? You find another document folded neatly in the back of the book. It's a letter, unsent, written by a midwife. They told me it would help the baby's sleep, that it was sheep's milk, warmed and sweetened. I saw the tubes. I asked. They said I had been blessed with a scientific mind. I didn't sleep again after the third one. When she smiled, there was blood between her teeth. I think she forgave me. I hope God won't. She signed only her first name, Clara. There's something in the drawer beneath the table, a glass bottle, half filled with a dark, syrupy substance. The label reads, mixed origin, preserved. It doesn't say whose. Want a strange historical aside? In 1667, after successfully transfusing sheep's blood into a man, Jean-Baptiste Denis later tried using human blood from a madman, believing his overactive temperament might cure melancholy. The patient died 3 days later. Denis claimed the failure was due to impurity of humour. Today, we call that manslaughter. But back in this room, they weren't testing cures for the mind. They were experimenting on innocence itself. Each crib in the room bears a small sigil carved into the headboard. Most are crosses. 1 is a star, 2 are empty. You kneel beside the nearest one. A toy lies on the mattress, a tiny bear sewn from sackcloth, its eyes long gone. You turn it over and feel something shift inside. A weight. You open the seam and find a tooth, a molar, baby-sized, stuffed into the toy like a seed of memory. You back away. Zoom out. This wasn't about helping children. It was about using them to test the boundaries of life and death. Blood, in the 1600s, was still a mystery. No one knew about types, about antigens, about rejection. They just knew it carried something powerful, something vital, and they were willing to take it, or give it, to anyone, even infants, especially infants, because they couldn't say no. Want one more tidbit in Italy? There were reports of monks experimenting with shared blood grace using transfusions between twins to test whether sin could be diluted. They believed if one child was bad and one good, sharing their blood might bring balance. The results were never published, but rumours say the bad one lived. Back here, the golden light still glows, but now it feels wrong, too perfect, too warm, like a lie embroidered into velvet. You extinguish the torch. It's not needed now, and as you exit the room, you swear you hear something, a soft breath, a tiny sigh, the sound a baby makes just before dreaming, or just after they've stopped. You emerge from the nursery like a diver surfacing from deep water, gasping without realizing it. The corridor is colder now, not by degrees, but by intention. The air wraps around you like wet cloth pulled from a well, and somewhere distant. The echo of chanting begins, slow, measured, the kind of sound that doesn't call you toward it, but pulls. You follow, because of course you do. The room opens without a door, just a threshold draped with chains, each one looped with dried rosemary and small tokens beads, carved crosses, teeth threaded like pearls. You step through, and the scent hits you blood, smoke, and sweat rubbed into the bones of the floor. This is no lab. This is a flagellant hall, a place where pain was prayer, and open wounds were believed to let light in. Flagellants were a phenomenon most strongly associated with the Black Death, but their roots run deeper. When society fractured, when pestilence stalked the streets and the sky offered no answers, some people didn't beg for mercy. They made themselves bleed for it. You walk further in. The room is lined with benches, simple wood stained dark with time and maybe more. In the centre lies a wide stretch of stone, polished not by design but by knees. Dozens, hundreds, crawling, kneeling, bowing. You can almost see them still, hooded, bare-backed, whipping themselves in rhythm to the chanting, the way a pendulum swings to keep time in a clock you no longer want to hear. On the far wall, a plaque carved with Latin through agony, forgiveness, through lashes, truth, through flesh, release. But this wasn't just spiritual. This was experimental. You see the racks next long wooden beams with restraints and carved markers at measured intervals. Not for torture. Exactly. Not judicial. No, this was the regulated study of penance through bodily trauma. According to a preserved manuscript by a Flemish monk named Brother Wilken, groups of flagellants were observed in controlled conditions to test thresholds of piety. He tracked how many lashes it took before subjects wept, confessed, collapsed, or began to hallucinate. One of his entries reads, Subject E1 11, age young, confessed to thievery after third round, vision of angels at fifth, silence at sixth, continued movement despite unconsciousness, declared sanctified. Sanctified, that word again. You find a stack of journals behind one of the benches. The leather is flaked with salt from dried sweat. Each page contains names, sins, durations. Some include drawings, crude diagrams of wound patterns. One lists preferred instruments: leather whip with iron nodes, birch branches soaked in wine, cat o' nine tails with inserted holy relics. Yes, relics. Tiny fragments of saint bones or consecrated metals were sometimes sewn into the cords not just to break flesh, but to sanctify it as it tore. You feel something beneath your boot. You look down. It's a fragment of whip, the handle still wrapped in cloth. Etched into the grip, Domine, Audi me, Lord, hear me. Want a disturbing aside. In 1374, a group of German flagellants marched from village to village, flogging themselves in public squares. A local apothecary decided to test whether pain could replace medicine, and offered no treatment to plague victims who joined them. He recorded a 12% increase in survival. Modern scholars believe this was luck, or dehydration, but the apothecary called it a miracle. In the corner of the chamber stands a low wooden pulpit. Atop it, a parchment pinned with a rusted nail. Today we begin with the Song of Bleeding. Each lash must be a prayer. If your soul is clean, the wound will close. If not, repent harder. You can almost hear them singing. A rhythm of pain turned into ritual. Every crack of the whip followed by a chant. Every chant followed by silence. And when the silence stretched too long, another lash. Zoom out. To many, This was madness. But to the flagellants, it was order. A structured, deliberate sacrifice of the body in a time when the world offered no fairness. Pain was measurable. Disease was not. So they bled, and hoped God would notice. But some men noticed too. Monks, physicians, curious scribes. And they began to study the pattern of suffering. They compared lash angles, whip lengths, the number of strokes it took before pupils dilated. One document refers to this as quantifying penitence. Another entry from a Spanish monastery claims a subject saw visions of St. Bartholomew after losing exactly 9 ounces of blood. They recreated the loss in another man. He saw nothing. So they bled him again. Want one more absurdity? In 1412, a French noblewoman with migraines was advised by a spiritual physician to flog herself 3 times every morning while chanting psalms backward. Her pain lessened. The church began prescribing the method. The woman later confessed to faking the migraines to avoid marital duties. The method remained canon. Back in the chamber, the benches now seem closer, or maybe you're just more aware of them, of the heat left behind in their wood, of the grooves carved by elbows digging in as the flesh behind them burned. You imagine the hands that gripped those edges, not to escape but to stay still, to take one more lash, one more, just one more. You find a final item near the altar, a small jar, dried, labelled only Tears of the Unrepentant. There's nothing inside. Of course there isn't. You leave the hall slowly, your footsteps muffled by ash or dust or skin. Behind you, the echo of chanting resumes, and your back itches. Right between the shoulder blades, you leave the flagellant hall with a strange ache behind your ribs like you'd been holding your breath in someone else's lungs. The passage ahead twists again, but this time it feels different, less like descent, more like circling, as if you're not going deeper, but closer. You push through a narrow arch, and the first thing you notice is the smell. Not rot, not blood, formaldehyde. It cuts through the stale air with the sharp clarity of a snapped bone. You're in a room lit by high, narrow windows, slits that drip faint light like candle wax down the stone walls. This place is cleaner than the others, surgical, intentional. It takes you a moment to realize what you're looking at. A dissection theatre. Wooden risers rise in tiers around a large central table. On it, dark stains, not red-brown, old, wiped over and over, but never clean. The smell clings to your tongue, sharp, sweet, unmistakably wrong. This is where bodies were opened not for judgment, or confession, or repentance, but for education. Welcome to the Butcher's Lecture Hall. Imagine you're a medical student in Padua, or Bologna, or Paris in the 1500s. The body in front of you isn't a person anymore. It's a lesson, maybe a criminal, maybe a grave-robbed pauper, maybe someone unclaimed, unnamed, and unmourned, and if the supply is low, maybe not even dead. You walk along the edge of the table, where metal hooks still hang from the rafters. You think they're for lanterns until you notice the frayed bits of rope. Restraint loops. There are scratch marks on the wood below them. Not deep, not many, just enough to suggest whoever was on this table once didn't go quietly. You find a ledger tucked into the drawer of a side table. The pages are stiff with age, brittle, but still legible. Case 22, subject expired mid-lecture. Audience numbered 17, removed spleen, passed for inspection. Gallbladder ruptured during extraction, caused mild panic. Students instructed not to flinch. A valuable lesson, you flip further. Case 26. Animal-human comparison day. Cow liver versus human liver. Student wagered they could not be distinguished blindfolded. Won. Class applauded. Instructor wept. Another case. 31 composite dissection. Constructed 1 subject from remains of 3. Declared anatomically plausible. Posed for sketching. Body collapse during rendering. Students instructed to label fragments. You feel your throat tighten. There's a drawing folded between the pages. It shows a woman's torso, flayed open, but stitched closed with rough thread along one side. The note beneath it reads, "Inserted goat lung for experimental respiration." Sound produced flute-like. They were experimenting, not just with bodies, with possibilities, because knowledge is hungry. And medieval anatomy was as much guesswork as gospel. On a strange aside, in 1533 a doctor in Antwerp stitched the head of a pig onto a man's corpse. His goal, to prove that the brain had no impact on soul function. He declared the experiment a failure not because it didn't work, but because the pig's eyes looked too knowing. The head was buried separately. Back here, in the lecture hall, you begin to see the games. In one corner, a cabinet of anatomical models, wooden mannequins with removable ribs, clay wombs holding miniature fetuses, and one sculpture showing a body turned entirely inside out. On its chest is carved "Truth is beneath." You step onto the risers. The view from above is worse. The table looks smaller now. The stains look deeper. You can almost hear the hum of students murmuring to one another, comparing notes, one eager, one nauseous, one laughing a little too loud, and beneath them a person, cut, measured, reduced, zoom out, and dissection was supposed to be progress, and it was, in many ways, but it also blurred boundaries between learning and cruelty, between question and crime, between curiosity and consent, especially when some of the bodies were still warm. Some monasteries turned over the recently dead within hours. Others were less patient. There are whispers in certain journals of monks asking the soul to leave before beginning the cut. They called it spiritual dismissal, but it was still a knife, and still a body. Want a more absurd detail? One surgeon in Prague kept trying to locate the human soul by removing organs one at a time during public lectures. He claimed it was somewhere between the pancreas and the shame. He died falling off the theatre balcony. Some said the soul pushed back. You reach the far wall, where there's another drawing etched into stone this time. A figure with a split torso, one half human, the other animal. Lines connect parts of the body to symbols: fire, water, iron, wheat. It's not a medical chart, it's alchemy. Because at some point, surgeons stopped asking how the body worked and started asking why. Why does grief hurt in the chest? Why does shame heat the face? What organ stores fear? You touch the carving, and the stone is warm. Not metaphorically. You step back, and then you hear it. A creak. Just one. From the table. As if old soaked wood had just exhaled for the first time in years. Want one more note from the ledger. Case 39. Audience refused to stay. Subject smiled throughout. Skin too soft. Eyes followed movement after removal. Instructor prayed for 3 days. Declared unsalvageable. Hall closed for winter. You leave through the side door. The light from the windows doesn't follow, and neither, thankfully, does the table. You expect more stone. Instead, your feet meet velvet. The hallway opens into something that feels wrong, plush, ornate. A long corridor draped in tapestries. The air warm and perfumed with rosewater and something sharp underneath like dried sweat hidden under powdered sugar. Candle sconces flicker along the walls, their light trembling as though nervous to show you what's next. A faint humming fills the air. You can't tell if it's a tune or the sound of someone trying not to scream. At the end of the corridor is a door, velvet-lined and trimmed with brass. You open it, slowly. Inside, flowers, paintings, a phonograph softly crackling with a lullaby that never quite finishes the melody. And in the centre, strapped upright in a chair padded with goose feathers, and red satin a man, eyes wide open, sleepless. You've arrived at the quarters of Count Wilhelm of Bavaria, a minor noble with a major obsession sleep. Not getting it. Preventing it. You see, Count Wilhelm didn't believe that sleep was rest. He believed it was surrender. And in the late 1600s, armed with wealth, power, and a rotating staff of unfortunate servants, he conducted one of the earliest known human sleep deprivation experiments. He kept them awake, days at a time, some for over a week, and then he wrote down what they saw. You approach a dressing table stacked with notebooks, dozens, each bound in velvet, embossed with the Count's crest, a yawning lion with its mouth sewn shut. You open the first. Subject 3, day 4. Began weeping when shown flowers. Said they smelled of teeth. Day 5. Confessed to a murder that had not occurred. Day 6 begged to be undreamed. You flip to another. Subject 6 insisted that Count Wilhelm was actually a twin controlling him through mirrors. Tried to gouge out own reflection. Restraints applied. Still singing, singing. You glance around the room. A harp rests in the corner, dusty, untuned, every string broken except one. You pluck it by accident. The note rings out too loud. The man in the chair doesn't flinch. He's been here a long time. A leather cuff around his ankle has worn a divot into the wood. The feathers around him have long turned grey. You approach his face. His pupils are wide, too wide, but his lips are parted just slightly, whispering something. You lean in. It sounds like math. He's counting, hey, not sheep. Seconds, and then minutes, and then days. Count Wilhelm believed that dreams contain the soul, that if you could delay sleep long enough, you could catch the dream before it entered the mind. He hired scribes to sit beside his subjects and write down every word they spoke as they teetered into delirium. He called them harvesters. You find one of their transcripts, subject 10, said he saw a door inside his own skull, said he heard chanting behind it, said the Count was knocking, asked if he should open it. We said no. He did anyway. The Count wasn't alone in his obsession. Across Europe, nobles were quietly fascinated with the idea that sleep hid secrets, that visions were visitations, that between wakefulness and dreaming, one might find truth, and truth, of course, was dangerous. That's why the Count kept them talking. Want something strange. In 1691, a physician in Geneva performed wakefulness trials on choir boys, believing the sleep-deprived mind would sing in perfect Latin without learning it. One boy began to sing entire psalms in reverse. The trial ended when the physician's wife reported hearing the songs before they were sung. Back in the Count's chamber, the man in the chair finally blinks. Once, then, slowly. He raises one finger and taps it against the armrest. You realize the indentations along the wood aren't decorative. They're recordings. One tap for each hour. Thousands. You step back. On the wall. Portraits. All the Count's subjects. Painted mid-experiment. Eyes dark. Lids heavy. Smiles twisted with effort. One is upside down. Another has no eyes, just black orbs scratched into the canvas. Beneath each frame, a name and a number. Karl 6 days. Isolde 8 days. Unnamed 11 days. Wilhelm 14 days. Yes. The Count turned the experiment inward. In the final book, you find his personal notes. Day 9. I cannot feel my fingers. I believe they are asleep without me. Day 11. I saw my own reflection move before I did. Day 13. I am speaking to someone who wears my voice. Day 14. There is no more counting. He stopped writing after that, but someone else finished the book. Same handwriting. Different pressure. You check the chair again. The man's lips have stopped moving, but the chair continues to creak, like he's still shifting in a dream you're not allowed to enter. Zoom out. Sleep is the border between the body and the unknown. And Count Wilhelm wanted to stand on that border and build a fence, one made of numbers, of observation, of sleepless souls. But you can't map dreams. You can only fall into them. And if you never fall, you never wake up either. Want another oddity? In Austria, one royal physician claimed that sleep was a form of slow suicide. He injected his patients with caffeine mixed with deer bile and forced them to recite nursery rhymes every hour on the hour. The longest survivor lasted 12 days. He claimed to have seen God. Then he recited the rhyme backward and collapsed. Back here, the phonograph stutters, the lullaby ends, but the needle keeps spinning, and behind you, the Count's portrait shifts slightly in the candlelight. His eyes are open, and he's still counting. The next hallway tilts. Not visually, your footing remains level, but something in your inner ear whispers wrong. Like the floor was built on a slant no eye can catch. Your fingers skim the wall for balance. Cold stone again, gritty with ash and faintly tacky, like old honey or dried sap. You're not sure when the chanting started again. It's lower now, slower. Like monks trying not to wake the dead, but you walk toward it anyway. The corridor bends into a narrow cloister, and ahead of you is a gate made of bone. Not ivory, not stylized. Actual, yellowed, knuckled human bone, lashed together with wire and sinew, femurs for uprights, spines for crossbars, skulls stacked like gargoyles grinning in silence. The gate is open, you step through, and you are instantly inside the quiet chapel. Also known in one surviving German manuscript as the Vocis Chasmatis, the voice hollow. Here, The church didn't experiment on the body, it experimented on the soul. Rows of wooden pews stretch out before you, worn down by knees and elbows and whispered apologies. But at the centre of the altar is something you've never seen before: a cage, and inside it, a chair, made entirely of mirrors, 1,000 tiny panels, each bent inward, like the person seated within would be reflected 100 ways but never seen whole. This, you realised, was the seat of silence, designed to trap sin. The theory: if someone sat inside and spoke their transgressions aloud, each confession would be caught in the angled glass, reflected, muted, bound, so it couldn't get out again. You approached the cage, scratched into the mirrors are faint words, a phrase that repeats, "It stayed with me." You're not sure if that means the sin or the voice. This wasn't just confession, it was containment. The church, specifically a fringe Benedictine order active in the 1400s, believed certain thoughts, when spoken, took on form. They called it oral transubstantiation. In short, words became things. So they began testing, first with monks, then with criminals, then with children deemed too loud or too strange. You find a scroll nearby. The ink is faded, but the entries are dated. Case 4, confessed to envy. Mirrors hummed for 3 days. Case 7, spoke of lust. Glass cracked on the left thigh. Case 12 said nothing, still heard weeping from the seat days later. The scroll is signed Brother Matthasius. You look up. A statue of Matthasius looms over the cage, his mouth open in shock, as if forever reacting to the echoes trapped below. On a chilling aside, in 1432 a nun in Avignon was sealed inside a resonance cloister after claiming that her own thoughts were no longer her own. She scratched poems into her skin, believing they were leaking out. The church kept her in silence for 8 years. When the walls were reopened, the inside was lined with mirrored tiles, but none had been there when it was sealed. Back in the chapel, the cage creaks slightly. You take a step closer, and you realise there's someone still inside. Or was. What's left is not a body. It's a shape, cloth, hair, a ring. A skeletal hand clutching a rosary made of glass beads, each one fractured as though under pressure from sound. You kneel to read the final inscription at the base of the cage. The voice that stayed was not my own. Zoom out. This wasn't just religious control. This was acoustic theology, the belief that sound could carry sin, that guilt had frequency, that evil vibrated, so they built chambers to trap it. One Benedictine cell in Austria had walls layered with sheep gut to absorb the syllables of the damned. Another cloister installed pipes into the ceiling to redirect screams into the earth. A few monks believed that the devil couldn't possess what couldn't echo. Want one more awful gem? In 1469, a cathedral in Italy reported a haunted hymn believed to drive singers mad. A young cantor named Elio survived 5 rehearsals by plugging his ears with wax. When he removed it during Mass, he fell to his knees and said only, "She was waiting." The hymn was burned. The echo allegedly wasn't. You glance at the cage again. The seat is now empty, but one mirror is still warm to the touch. And when you pull your hand back, your palm carries a small message, fogged in condensation that fades before you can read it. As you exit the chapel, the chanting stops. Not fades, stops. And for the first time in hours or maybe days, you realize you can hear your own breath again. You wish you couldn't. The silence following the voice hollow is somehow louder than any scream you've heard tonight. Your ears ring, phantom-like, as if they're still adjusting to the sudden absence of ancient whispers. You pass back into darkness, the faint sound of your own steps returning like a heartbeat you weren't sure was still yours, and then you hear it, not chanting, not moaning, laughter, not joyous, not warm. This laughter is ragged, intermittent, like a child trying to mimic joy without knowing the punchline. You turn the corner. The room is circular, candlelit, and most unexpectedly painted. Every inch of wall is covered in murals, cartoonish, almost joyful depictions of angels, demons, kings, doctors, and clowns. One of them stares directly at you. Its paint is peeling at the eye. Welcome to the Chamber of the Laughing Cure, a grotesque experiment in forced optimism. In the early 1500s, when melancholy was seen as both a spiritual and physical illness, sometimes even contagious. Certain monasteries and physicians devised humoral rebalancing chambers designed to shock sadness out of the soul. This particular method was based on a theory proposed by a pseudo-doctor named Father Girolamo del Sorriso, a disgraced friar who claimed that laughter expelled dark bile from the body. His cure: lock patients in a chamber and surround them with constant, unrelenting mirth. No matter the cost. You walk deeper into the room. It's too warm here, overheated, almost sticky, like the breath of an audience held for too long. Puppets dangle from the ceiling on strings. Painted faces, fixed grins. One sways slightly, no breeze. You step over a padded stool. A torn jester hat lies on the floor. On the far wall, a stage. Tiny, curtained, absurdly detailed. Below it, a plaque. Let not a single tear fall here, lest the devil drink it. You kneel to peer inside. The stage is set for a marionette show. The puppets are grotesque caricatures: nuns with goat legs, a bishop with a chicken's head, a butcher holding a mirror instead of a cleaver. They're frozen mid-performance. One is missing its head. Behind the stage lies a wooden box, inside dozens of scripts, handwritten. You pull one out. The Trial of Melancholy Act We're. Scene. The doctor. Why so glum the patient? The worms sing in my eyes. The doctor. Then we shall drown them in giggles. You close the script. You find another smaller stained, annotated by hand. Subject 12 refused to laugh. Applied tickle bag. No response. Reapplied with mirth mask. Result: cracked lips. False smile. Subject now smiles at walls. Declared successful. The tickle bag, by the way, was not a metaphor. It was a real device: goat hair, feathers, metal brushes, bound together and strapped to the body's most sensitive parts, applied manually, for hours, for health. And the mirth mask. A leather strap system designed to force a person's mouth into a grin. Think of it as orthodontics by way of psychosis. This wasn't comedy. It was exorcism through joy. Zoom out. Europe in the late Middle Ages was terrified of sorrow not because it was painful, but because it was seen as a gateway to demonic possession. Sadness was weakness, and weakness opened doors. So they tried to laugh the darkness away, or beat it into a smile. One document from a Florentine convent describes a girl who refused to smile for 7 days after being told to joyfully greet God. On the 8th day, they removed her from prayer and placed her in a room of comedic saturation. Inside were paintings of animals in human clothing, monks making fart jokes, and a nun who dressed as a donkey and brayed during meals. The girl reportedly died smiling, but she died. Want a ridiculous aside? In 1527, an Italian physician proposed that tickling the inner ear with swan feathers would release endorphins. His assistant got stuck. The assistant later reported hearing giggling from inside his own skull for 3 days. He became a playwright. You move past the stage and discover a trapdoor. You hesitate, but you open it. Beneath a padded pit, straps on the walls, feathers, bells. A sign burned into the floor reads, "Here joy is born from silence," and beneath it, the outline of a body, not in blood, in chalk. Someone once refused to laugh. They buried that failure here. Back in the room, you see something else, something newly added, a mirror. But unlike the others you've seen, this one is warped not from time, but design. Your reflection is stretched into a smile, even if your real mouth remains still. As you watch yourself grin, the laughter starts again. Softer this time, but closer. It isn't coming from the room. It's coming from inside the mirror. You back away, zoom out again. The laughing chambers were never just about healing. They were control disguised as care. If you smiled, you were saved. If you didn't, you were sick. And if you resisted too long, you weren't just ill. You were damned. Want one more historical fragment? In Bavaria, a nobleman named Otto Krieg refused to grieve after his wife's death. Monks forced him into a festival cell where he was surrounded by music, jesters, and erotic poetry. On day 5, he stabbed a puppet in the heart and said, "She's in the strings." The puppet was burned. Otto was never seen again. Back in the chamber, the candlelight shifts. One puppet on the ceiling drops a few inches. You don't stay to see if the others follow. The laughter fades behind you like the tail end of a fever dream, leaving only the sound of your own breath, slow and cautious, as you step into a corridor that feels sterile, too clean, too new. The stone is smooth here, almost polished. The flickering torchlight reflects faintly off the walls, casting double shadows that make it seem like you're not walking alone. You notice something else. 2 vents carved into the stone, narrow slits no wider than a finger, from which warm air pulses like the rhythmic exhale of a beast too large to see. You've arrived in the vital room, a term found only in a single 14th century manuscript smuggled from an abbey near Avila, Spain. The manuscript has no author, only a stamped symbol, a heart held between 2 sets of tongs. Welcome to the Mechanical Soul Project. This is where monks, tinkerers, and surgeons tried to replicate life not through potions or prayers, but through physical reconstruction, artificial organs, pumping devices, clockwork lungs. It was, depending on who you ask, the first attempt at a human machine, and you're standing in the relic of it. The room is circular and filled with objects that defy easy description. On one table lies a long brass tube fitted with valves and leather bellows like a church organ trying to pretend it's a lung. Beside it, a copper bowl filled with thin tubes of glass, coiled like intestines. At the centre of the room stands a man-sized contraption shaped like a ribcage, metal bars bent and soldered into form. Inside it, nestled where a heart would be, ticks a small mechanism, slowly, steadily, tick, tick, tick. You don't think it's just a clock. You find a ledger resting nearby on a lectern. The first few pages are smudged with soot, but one entry remains test subject 2 male, fitted with brass lungs and spring-loaded diaphragm, expired on breath 3, reclassified as non-viable chassis. Test subject 3, female, blood replaced with mercury, body stiffened, eye movement persisted for 90 seconds post-mortem, considered partial animation. You flip ahead. Test subject 7, composite, human torso, goat heart, glass stomach, movement observed, sound produced tick grunt, terminated after eye contact established. What were they trying to build? Not a man. Not exactly. They were trying to build obedience. If you could create a body that never tired, never rebelled, never died, what king wouldn't want an army of those? One that breathes steam, that bleeds oil, that forgets nothing. You find a diagram of the ideal design. It's drawn with eerie precision, a skeletal structure made of iron, veins made of twine soaked in whale oil, lungs of pigskin stretched over bellows. It even includes a failsafe, a wax tablet behind the eyes that melts when the soul overheats. You move toward a figure draped in cloth, half hidden in shadow. You pull the fabric back and find a torso, human, at least partially. The skin is grey, not decayed, but preserved in something slick and resinous. Tubes emerge from the sides. One runs into the chest cavity, another up toward the jaw. Its mouth is sewn shut, but the chest rises, ever so slightly, not breathing, just ticking. Some part of it is still running. Want an obscure tangent. In 1459, a Portuguese alchemist named Tomás de Morata claimed to create a breathing idol powered by the vapour of men's hearts. Witnesses described it as a copper maiden that sang hymns at dawn. It was dismantled by priests, who swore they heard it whisper again as it was melted. Back here in the vital room, the air pulses again from those vents. Not air. You realise now. Steam. A pipe overhead groans. Condensation drips onto the floor, hissing when it hits the metal grates that line the walkway. You follow the path toward the back of the room and find a second chair lower, sleeker, shaped more like a throne than a surgeon's stool. At its base, a plaque in the absence of soul. Let motion be enough. They weren't just building bodies, they were trying to replace the divine. Zoom out. If blood is sacred and breath is holy, what happens when you replicate both using brass and fire? Does the result deserve rights, respect, forgiveness? Or is it just another tool? Some believed these mechanical humans could pray. Others insisted they couldn't sin, and that was the point. No soul means no guilt. You find a strange object on a nearby shelf, a mask with lenses over the eyes and a hinged jaw. Inside it, a thin scroll of parchment, wound tight. You unfurl it. It's a prayer, but it's written backward. The ink smudged as if copied by hands, not quite steady or not quite human. One last note in the ledger catches your eye. Final trial composite model, activated at third bell. Responded to Latin command. Walked 6 steps. paused, whispered, "Why was I made destroyed at dawn? Command room sealed. Project ended. For now." You look toward the ribcage at the center of the room again. Tick, tick, tick. It hasn't stopped. And something about its rhythm sounds curious, almost like it's listening or waiting. Want one final grotesque fact? Some early experiments used condemned men executed at dawn, revived before dusk. One allegedly woke up mid-dissection, asking if he'd been reborn clean. When he began praying in tongues no one recognized, they removed his lungs and tried them in someone else. You hear a hiss from behind you. Just steam, just heat, just history. You tell yourself, but you don't stay long enough to see if the ribcage moves. The steam fades behind you in damp breaths, the smell of metal and scorched linen still clinging to your clothes. Your legs feel heavier now, like your body is remembering everything it's seen, everything it's absorbed. You descend the next stairwell slowly, carefully, each step a little less real than the last. There's no light down here, not even flickering torches or that glow from nowhere you've grown used to. Only cold, only stillness. The kind that doesn't just hang in the air, it presses. Down here, you realize nothing wants to move. The door at the bottom is ancient oak, banded in rusted iron and sealed with a chain that's already been broken. Someone came through before you, someone who knew what waited. You press it open. The hinges whisper, not squeal. Inside, everything is grey. Not because there's no light, but because the light has given up. What little there is comes from oil lamps, flickering blue, casting shadows that refuse to align with your own. You're in a library, but this one doesn't smell of paper or ink. It smells like vinegar and salt and something worse beneath it all, like spoiled wine and wet stone. The shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, packed not with books, but with jars, glass jars, each sealed with wax, labelled meticulously in ink that's long since browned, but still legible, and inside them parts, a hand, a section of scalp, a foot curled like a fist, a tongue. Some of the jars hold only a single tooth, others a pair of lungs, floating like pale wings in amber syrup. This is no archive. This is preservation. You've entered what historians now refer to very, very carefully as the Library of Quiet Bodies. The records we have of this place are few and fragmented. Most references to it appear only in letters hastily smuggled between 15th century anatomists and condemned monks. It was said to be hidden beneath a defunct medical chapel. Others believed it was part of an order that had been excommunicated for necromantic practices. But what's clear painfully, precisely clear, is that this was a vault for bodies that could not be allowed to die quietly. You step through the aisles. The jars whisper in your peripheral vision. You tell yourself it's the shifting liquid, that it's normal for the contents to float slightly when disturbed, but the lids aren't shaking. The air doesn't move, yet something inside them does. The first label you pause to read says Subject 913, Vocal Study, Phase 4. Refuse to scream, preserved mid-breath. The jar contains what appears to be a mouth, not attached to anything, just a section of jaw and lips, still parted slightly, like it's waiting to finish a sentence. Another subject, Nerdisty 8, Repetitive Movement Experiment. Fingers removed one by one, preserved after unprompted tapping resumed. Inside are 5 fingers, bent as if mid-drum on a surface you can't see. One has a ring still attached. The nail on the index finger is broken. You walk on. At the centre of the library is a desk. Atop it, a massive book bound in leather so aged it feels brittle to the eye. Its edges are dark, the corners curling like burned leaves. You lift the cover. It isn't a register. It's a manifesto. This place shall be memory embodied. That which was useful, that which was learned, shall not be discarded. We do not burn truth here. We bottle it. We cork it. We display it so it cannot be denied. There are lists. Each entry gives a number, a date, and a description. S1001 confessed to heresy while sedated. Removed eyes to examine truth reaction. Eyes clouded. Declared untruthful. Preserved. S1019 claimed to feel nothing. Skin removed incrementally. Never cried. Declared anomalous. Preserved. You flip to the back. There's a list of missing items. S1066 vocal cords. Removed. Escaped containment. Last heard humming Ave Maria. The entry is crossed out not in ink, but scored into the page with a knife. You look up. In the far corner of the room is a recessed space lined with lead, like a walk-in vault. Unlike the others, it has only a single object on display, a large jar sealed with not wax, but glass blown into place. Its label reads, S1100, Brain of Final Compiler. Conscious activity suspected. Do not engage. The jar holds a pale, trembling brain suspended in glowing yellow fluid. You swear only for a second that it pulses, not with life, but with memory. Zoom out. This wasn't just a storage space. This was a monument, a place built to remember every experiment, every incision, every soul that had been reduced to parts. Their bodies weren't discarded, they were displayed. Not for reverence, but for replication. Each jar was a blueprint, a how-to guide in glass and sinew. Want something absurd? In one document from 1493, an anatomist wrote to his patron claiming he had successfully taught a knee to pray. He meant this literally. He said that, when removed and wired to a bellows device, the kneecap flexed in response to Latin prayers. The device was stolen by another monk. No one knows where it ended up. You continue through the aisle. You try not to read every label, but one catches you. Not for its words, but its blankness. No name, no number, no date. Inside the jar a child's hand, small, clenched. Next to it, a tiny strip of cloth pinned to the shelf. It reads, "She kept reaching." You can't breathe for a moment. Not out of fear, out of recognition. You've been reaching too, for understanding, for explanation, for the illusion that all this horror, these medieval miseries somehow belong to the past. But now you know better. This wasn't ancient. This wasn't outdated. This was methodical. And if there's a room like this, maybe there are others. You reach the final aisle. A mirror stands at the end, just like in other rooms. But here it doesn't reflect your face. It reflects your jar, labelled, numbered, catalogued. You reach out to touch it, and your hand presses not against glass, but fluid a surface that wobbles. And behind your own reflection, you see the jars, rising, floating upward, not in protest, but in pattern, as if they are preparing to be used again. Because somewhere, someone has read these ledgers, these notes, these experiments, and they're thinking, we could finish what they started. You leave the library with shaking legs, but the door doesn't close behind you, and the mirror doesn't stop rippling. So here you are. You've wandered through flickering torchlight and cold stone, through experiments no one should have conducted and chambers no one should have survived. You've stood where sinners were split open in the name of science, where monks whispered nonsense and called it truth, where bodies became tools and souls were folded away like napkins. And yet, you're still here, still breathing. The air around you is quiet now, not silent, just soft, like the hush of a church long after the sermon ends. Dust settles gently across the floor. Somewhere above, the world keeps turning, completely unaware of what still lingers below. You made it through, and maybe now you understand something strange, that horror, when it's old enough, stops being sharp, it rounds out, it dulls at the edges, it becomes history. And history, as you now know, is just memory with scabs on it. Tonight, we wandered through those scars together, and despite the madness disguised as logic, one thing remains constant curiosity. They chased it too far. They tore it from the sky like a falling star and tried to pin it to the earth. But in the end, even they couldn't explain everything. They never really could. So now, as the final echoes settle and your eyelids begin to drift, let yourself release those ancient images. Let them sink back into the dark, where they belong. You don't need to carry them anymore. Just breathe, in and out. You're safe now. Far above the tunnels, the night air is cool. A breeze rattles a shutter, somewhere a candle flickers out, and a distant bell marks the hour. The world is still turning, and you're finally free to sleep.